Let's start with the simple truth: communication is the foundation of any relationship. Yet so often we find ourselves tangled in expectations, wondering why the other person isn't reaching out first. If you've ever sat staring at your phone, waiting for a message that doesn't come, you've probably felt the sting of imbalance. And that's what we're talking about here: balance. Communication at its core should flow naturally. It's a give and take, a rhythm where two people meet each other halfway. When that rhythm is disrupted, it tells you something important. Now, when a man never texts you first, what does it mean? Let's not leap to conclusions or assume the worst. Instead, let's explore what this imbalance really reveals. Because you see, relationships are like mirrors. They reflect not just the other person, but also what we feel about ourselves. And when communication becomes one-sided, it's worth pausing to consider what that reflection is showing us. Perhaps it's nothing personal. Maybe he's the kind of person who gets caught up in the moment, lost in his own world, forgetting to reach out. Maybe he doesn't even realize the silence he's leaving in his wake. Or maybe, just maybe, his lack of initiation is a signal that something deeper is at play. It could mean he's not as invested, or that he's unsure, or even that he's taking your efforts for granted. The truth is, the reason doesn't matter as much as the pattern does. Patterns reveal priorities. And when someone consistently lets you carry the weight of communication, it's worth asking, why is this happening? But here's the thing: this isn't just about him. It's about you too. It's about how you respond, how you feel, and what you choose to do with this imbalance. Because in every interaction there's an invitation to learn something about yourself. When you're the one always reaching out, it might feel like you're the only one keeping the connection alive. And that feeling over time can chip away at your sense of worth. This is where balance becomes more than just a word. It's a principle, a guide for how we navigate relationships. Communication shouldn't feel like a chore, nor should it feel like a test. It should feel natural, mutual, and affirming. When it doesn't, that's your cue to pause, not to chase, not to demand, but to reflect. What does this situation say about what you need? About what you're willing to accept? There's something freeing in recognizing this. It's not your job to convince someone to care, to remind them to think of you, or to make them prioritize you. That has to come from within them. And if it doesn't, then perhaps the relationship isn't aligned in the way it needs to be. Because relationships thrive not when one person is carrying all the weight, but when both are equally invested. But don't mistake this for indifference or apathy. This isn't about giving up or turning away out of pride. It's about respecting the natural flow of connection. When you stop chasing, you give space for the other person to step forward or to step away. And that space is essential. It's where clarity lives. It's where you see things as they truly are, without the fog of overthinking or overcompensating. So, the next time you find yourself waiting for a message that doesn't come, resist the urge to overreach. Resist the urge to fill the silence with your own noise. Instead, let the silence speak. Let it show you whether the connection is mutual or one-sided. Let it reveal the balance or imbalance that exists. Because in the end, what you deserve is someone who meets you where you are. Someone who values the effort you bring and matches it with their own. Someone who doesn't make you question your worth or your place in their life. And if that's not what you're seeing, then maybe the silence is offering you a gift, the gift of perspective, of self-respect, of freedom. Remember, communication isn't just about words exchanged. It's about the energy, the effort, and the intention behind those words. And when those things are missing, no amount of texting first will fill the gap. So take a step back, take a breath, And trust that the connections meant for you will always feel balanced, mutual, and effortless. Let the silence guide you not as a sign of rejection, but as a sign of direction. Sometimes the most powerful choice you can make is to stop chasing and simply allow what is meant to be, to be. Let's consider for a moment what it truly means when you keep initiating contact with someone who never initiates it back. At its heart, it's not just about texting. It's about the balance of energy in the relationship. When you're the one always reaching out, you're pouring your energy into the connection, giving a part of yourself every time. And what happens when that energy isn't returned? Slowly but surely, it drains you. It leaves you wondering, why isn't my effort being matched? The real question to ask here isn't, why won't they text me first? But rather, why am I so willing to keep chasing this dynamic? Because when we're honest with ourselves, we realize that the need to keep reaching out often stems from a deeper place. It's a reflection of our own fears and insecurities, a quiet worry that if we stop trying, the relationship might disappear altogether. But here's the paradox: a connection worth having doesn't require constant chasing. If the bond is real, if it's mutual, it will sustain itself without one person doing all the work. In fact, when we stop chasing, we give the relationship the space it needs to breathe. And in that space, the truth reveals itself. Now let's look at the flip side. Imagine what it feels like to always be the one pursued, to never have to make the effort to maintain a connection. It's not necessarily intentional, but it can create complacency. The other person becomes accustomed to your efforts and may start to take them for granted. They might not even realize they're doing it. But here's the thing: your effort shouldn't feel invisible, unnoticed, or undervalued. It should inspire reciprocity. And that's where self-awareness comes into play. When you notice that you're always the one texting first, pause. Ask yourself, am I doing this because I genuinely want to, or because I feel I have to? There's a big difference. When your effort comes from a place of obligation or fear, it's no longer authentic. And relationships built on obligation, on unbalanced effort, rarely thrive. Instead of continuing the cycle, try this step back. Stop texting first and see what happens. It's not a game or a manipulation, it's an experiment in balance. By stepping back, you're allowing the relationship to recalibrate itself. If the other person values the connection, they will notice your absence and make an effort to bridge the gap. If they don't, then that's the clarity you need. Stepping back doesn't mean cutting them off or turning cold. It means shifting your energy back to yourself. Use that energy to focus on your own life, your passions, your joy, because here's the truth: the more you invest in yourself, the more magnetic you become. People are drawn to those who radiate confidence and self-assuredness, not those who are constantly chasing validation. But when you stop chasing, you send a powerful message, not just to the other person, but to yourself. You're saying, I am worthy of mutual effort. I am deserving of a connection where my energy is matched. And when you hold yourself to that standard, you will find that the dynamics of your relationships begin to shift. Those who value you will rise to meet you. Those who don't will naturally fall away. And that's okay, because the relationships that fall away are simply making room for the ones that align with who you truly are. They're making space for connections that feel balanced, fulfilling, and effortless. So, if you find yourself stuck in a dynamic where you're always the one initiating, remember this: it's not about whether they text you first. It's about whether the relationship feels mutual. And if it doesn't, then it's time to let go of the chase and trust in the natural flow of connection. Because the relationships that matter, the ones that truly nourish your soul, don't require chasing. They flow effortlessly, naturally, like a river finding its way to the sea. In the end, it's about reclaiming your energy, your worth, your sense of self. And when you do that, you'll find that the right people will always find their way to you. They'll text you first, not because you ask them to, but because they value the connection as much as you do. So, stop chasing and let the truth of your relationships reveal itself. Trust in the flow and let everything else fall into place. Let's shift our focus now to an often overlooked aspect of relationships' emotional investment. When you find yourself repeatedly initiating contact with someone who never reaches out first, it's a sign of imbalance. But this imbalance doesn't just exist in the realm of actions, it seeps deeply into the emotional space of the relationship. Think about it every time you extend yourself. You're offering a piece of your emotional energy. And when that offering isn't reciprocated, it creates a quiet tension. A silent question, am I more invested in this than they are? This isn't just about texting or making plans. It's about the dynamic that develops when one person gives freely and the other simply receives. It's a pattern, and like all patterns, it has a way of repeating itself unless consciously addressed. The real challenge here isn't convincing the other person to match your effort. It's understanding why you're willing to overextend yourself in the first place. Ask yourself, why am I giving so much when I'm getting so little in return? It's not an easy question, but it's an important one. Often we give more because we believe that's how we'll prove our value. We think, if I show them how much I care, they'll finally see my worth. But relationships aren't about proving anything. They're about mutual recognition and appreciation of each other's presence without conditions or expectations. When you overinvest emotionally, you're not just filling the gap in effort, you're also assuming responsibility for the entire connection. You carry the weight of maintaining the bond, and in doing so, you rob the other person of the opportunity to show up for you. Relationships thrive on reciprocity, on the ebb and flow of mutual effort. When you do it all, you break that rhythm. Here's where it gets deeper. Emotional overinvestment often stems from fear. Fear of losing the connection. Fear of being alone. Fear of facing the uncomfortable truth that maybe this relationship doesn't mean as much to them as it does to you. But here's the paradox: the more you give out of fear, the more likely it is that the relationship will crumble under the pressure of unmet expectations. True connection doesn't arise from fear, it arises from authenticity, from being willing to show up as you are without needing to earn your place. So what's the alternative? How do you shift the dynamic without turning it into a power struggle? It begins with self-awareness. Recognize when you're giving more than you're receiving, and ask yourself what's driving that behavior. Is it a desire to connect, or is it a need for validation? If it's the latter, it's time to redirect that energy inward. The validation you seek can't come from someone else. It must come from within. When you step back from overinvesting, you're not withdrawing love or care. You're simply reclaiming the emotional space you've been pouring into someone who hasn't done the same. This isn't about playing games or creating distance, it's about setting a boundary. And boundaries aren't walls, they're bridges. They allow relationships to grow in a healthy, balanced way. Imagine what happens when you stop overextending yourself. Suddenly there's space. Space for the other person to notice your absence, to recognize the effort they've taken for granted, and to decide whether they value the connection enough to step up. And if they don't, that's not a reflection of your worth. It's simply clarity, a gift really, because it frees you from investing in something that was never truly mutual. This shift isn't just about changing the dynamic with the other person. It's about changing the relationship you have with yourself. When you stop over-investing, you affirm your own value. You send a message to yourself that says, I am enough. I don't need to give more than I receive to be worthy of love and connection. And that message is transformative. The beauty of this approach is that it's not about control or manipulation. It's about alignment. It's about ensuring that your actions reflect the balance you desire in your relationships. When you act from a place of balance, you create space for others to meet you there. And those who truly value you will rise to the occasion. They'll text first, not because they're prompted, but because they genuinely want to. Remember, the goal isn't to force someone to care or to prove your worth. It's to create relationships that feel natural, mutual, and fulfilling. And the first step toward that is to stop giving more than you receive. Trust that those who are meant to be in your life will meet you halfway. And when they do, the connection will feel effortless, like a dance where both partners move in harmony, not one leading while the other merely follows. Let's talk about the idea of expectations, those unspoken contracts we write in our minds about how others should act toward us. When someone never texts you first, it's easy to feel frustrated, neglected, or even unworthy. But the deeper truth is this: much of the pain we feel in such situations doesn't come from their action, it comes from our own attachment to how we think things ought to be. We create these mental narratives all the time, often without realizing it. We tell ourselves stories like, if they cared about me, they'd reach out. Or a real friend, a real partner, wouldn't make me feel this way. These stories aren't inherently wrong, but they set us up for disappointment when reality doesn't align with the script we've written. The question isn't whether the expectation is fair, it's whether it serves you. Think about it. When you hold on to rigid expectations, you give someone else power over your peace of mind. Their actions, or lack thereof, begin to dictate how you feel about yourself and the relationship. It's as though your happiness is tethered to their behavior, and every unmet expectation pulls at that tether, leaving you feeling unsteady, unsure. But here's the liberating truth: expectations aren't facts, they're constructs. And like any construct, they can be deconstructed, re-examined, and reshaped. When you start to let go of those rigid ideas about what someone should do, you make room for a more authentic connection, one that isn't clouded by disappointment or resentment. This doesn't mean you lower your standards or settle for less than you deserve. It means you shift your focus from what you think others should give you to what you truly need and value. When you stop demanding that others meet your expectations, you free yourself from the constant cycle of hope and letdown. You begin to see people as they are, not as you wish them to be. Now, this doesn't mean you accept behavior that consistently hurts or disrespects you. Letting go of expectations isn't about becoming a doormat, it's about recognizing the difference between preferences and requirements. Preferences are things you'd like to have in a relationship, like someone who texts you first, but they aren't deal breakers. Requirements, on the other hand, are the fundamental values and behaviors that form the foundation of a healthy connection. The key is to know which is which. When you let go of the need for someone to text first, you create space for self-reflection. You start to ask yourself questions like, why does this bother me so much? Or what am I seeking from this connection? Often the answers reveal deeper truths about our own insecurities or unmet needs. And once you uncover those truths, you can address them directly instead of projecting them onto someone else. Letting go of expectations also opens the door to curiosity. Instead of assuming they don't care because they don't reach out, you can approach the situation with a sense of wonder what might be going on in their world. Maybe they're dealing with their own struggles. Maybe they express care in ways that aren't as obvious or frequent. Or maybe they simply aren't as invested as you are, and that, too, is valuable information. This shift in perspective doesn't just benefit your relationships with others, it transforms your relationship with yourself. When you stop clinging to expectations, you stop tying your self-worth to how others behave. You begin to find your sense of value within, not in external validation. And from that place of inner security, you can engage with others more freely, without the weight of unmet demands. Imagine what it feels like to let go of the constant questioning, the second guessing, the endless analysis of why someone isn't meeting your expectations. Instead of chasing after answers or trying to control outcomes, you simply observe. You notice their actions or lack thereof and respond accordingly. If someone's behavior doesn't align with what you value, you step back, not out of spite or anger, but out of self-respect. And if their actions do align with your needs, you meet them there with openness and gratitude. In this way, letting go of expectations isn't about giving up on people or relationships. It's about giving up on the illusion that you can control them. It's about trusting that the right connections will flow naturally, without force or pressure. And in that trust, you find peace. So the next time you find yourself waiting for a text that doesn't come, pause. Breathe. Remind yourself that your worth isn't defined by their response or lack thereof. Let go of the expectation and in its place, embrace the freedom to simply be. Because in the end, the most fulfilling connections aren't the ones that meet every expectation. They're the ones that unfold naturally in their own time, in their own way. And that unfolding is where the real magic lies. Imagine for a moment that you stop trying to figure out why someone isn't texting you first. You stop analyzing, questioning, or even wondering. Instead, you focus on yourself, your feelings, your boundaries, and your well-being. It's a shift that feels radical at first because so much of our energy goes outward, trying to interpret the actions of others. But what if you turn that energy inward? What if you asked yourself, what do I truly want? What do I need from this connection? And most importantly, how do I honor myself in this situation? When you choose to focus on your own boundaries, you reclaim your power. Boundaries are not walls to keep people out. They are lines that protect your peace, your values, and your emotional health. They say, this is where I stand, and this is what I will or won't accept. Without boundaries, it's easy to get caught in cycles of overthinking and overextending yourself for people who may not reciprocate your energy. Now, let's be clear, setting boundaries isn't about punishing the other person or playing games. It's not about saying, if you don't text first, I won't text at all, as a way to manipulate the situation. True boundaries are about clarity and self-respect. They allow you to communicate your needs and expectations while also accepting that others may not always meet them, and that's okay. For example, if you find yourself in a dynamic where you're always the one initiating contact, it's worth asking yourself why that bothers you. Is it because you feel the relationship is one-sided? Or is it because you've tied their lack of initiation to your sense of worth? There's no right or wrong answer here, but being honest with yourself is the first step towards setting healthy boundaries. When you establish boundaries, you begin to shift the focus from what the other person is or isn't doing to how you choose to respond. Let's say you decide that mutual effort in communication is important to you. You might express that need to the other person in a kind but direct way. Something like, I value our connection, and it would mean a lot to me if you reached out more often. If they respond positively, great. If they don't, you have a decision to make. Do you adjust your expectations, or do you step back from the relationship? And here's the beauty of boundaries: they simplify things. You no longer have to waste mental energy trying to decode someone's behavior. If their actions align with your boundaries, you move forward. If they don't, you adjust accordingly. There's no need for drama, resentment, or overthinking, just a clear understanding of what you're willing to give and receive. But boundaries aren't just about what you expect from others, they're also about what you expect from yourself. Are you honoring your own needs, or are you compromising them in an attempt to keep the peace or maintain a connection? Too often we sacrifice our boundaries out of fear of rejection, fear of conflict, fear of being alone. But in doing so, we betray ourselves. And the truth is, no relationship is worth that. When you stand firm in your boundaries, you send a powerful message not just to others, but to yourself. You say, I value myself enough to protect my energy. I respect myself enough to demand respect in return. This isn't about arrogance or entitlement, it's about recognizing your inherent worth. And when you operate from that place of self-respect, you attract people who value you for who you are, not for what you can give or do for them. Now let's talk about the flip side of boundaries, letting go of control. Because as much as boundaries are about honoring yourself, they're also about accepting that you can't control how others respond. You can't make someone text you first, care in the way you want them to, or meet every expectation you have. And that's okay. Their actions are a reflection of them, not you. The moment you release the need to control others, you free yourself from so much unnecessary stress and disappointment. You begin to see relationships as they are, not as you wish they were. And from that place of clarity, you can decide what's worth your time and energy and what's not. So, the next time you find yourself frustrated because someone isn't texting you first, take a step back. Ask yourself, what am I really feeling? What do I truly need? And how can I honor myself in this moment? When you answer those questions honestly, you'll find that the power isn't in their hands, it's in yours. Because at the end of the day, boundaries are an act of self-love. And when you love yourself enough to set and uphold them, you don't need anyone else's validation to feel whole. You are enough just as you are. And that truth is the foundation of every meaningful connection you'll ever have. Imagine stepping into a moment of perfect clarity, where you suddenly realize that someone's lack of action doesn't have to hold power over you. It's a shift that can feel almost surreal, as though you've stepped out of the tangled web of emotions and expectations that relationships so often bring. In that moment, you see the truth, the energy you've been expending trying to interpret someone else's silence, trying to fill the gaps they leave, is energy you can reclaim for yourself. And with that realization comes freedom. When someone doesn't initiate contact, it's easy to fall into a spiral of self-doubt. We wonder if we're not interesting enough, not important enough, or if we've somehow done something wrong. But the truth is, their silence is not a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of their priorities, their mindset, or perhaps their struggles. Whatever the reason, it belongs to them, not to you. And when you internalize that, you free yourself from the burden of trying to fix or explain their behavior. But this isn't just about understanding their silence, it's about using it as an opportunity for growth. You see, every relationship is a mirror, reflecting back parts of ourselves we might not always want to see. When someone doesn't text you first, it forces you to confront the discomfort of waiting, the fear of rejection, and the longing for connection. And in that discomfort lies a chance to grow. Instead of asking, why aren't they reaching out? Ask yourself, what can I learn from this? Maybe it's a lesson in patience. Maybe it's a chance to practice self-compassion. Or maybe it's an invitation to let go of people-pleasing tendencies and embrace your own value. Whatever it is, their silence can become a doorway to deeper self-awareness if you let it. This process requires honesty, though. It's not about pretending you don't care or dismissing your feelings. It's about acknowledging them without judgment. Maybe you feel hurt, frustrated, or even angry. That's okay. Those feelings are valid. But once you've allowed yourself to feel them, you can begin to move beyond them. You can choose to see this situation not as a rejection, but as a redirection, an opportunity to turn your attention inward and reconnect with yourself. And here's where the real magic happens. When you stop chasing validation from others, you create space for something much more powerful, self-acceptance. You no longer need someone else to make you feel valued because you already know your worth. You don't need their texts or their attention to feel seen because you've learned to see yourself. And when you operate from that place of self-assurance, the dynamics of your relationships begin to shift. People can sense when you're coming from a place of confidence rather than neediness. It's not about playing hard to get or following some arbitrary rules. It's about genuinely valuing yourself and allowing that to shine through in your actions. You respond, but you don't overextend. You care, but you don't overcompensate. You give, but only as much as feels right for you. And in doing so, you invite others to meet you at that same level of respect and authenticity. But what if they don't? What if their silence continues despite your clarity and growth? That's the ultimate test and the ultimate gift. Because it forces you to ask yourself, is this connection truly serving me? Does it align with my values, my boundaries, and my vision for my life? If the answer is no, then perhaps it's time to let go, not out of anger or resentment, but out of love for yourself. Letting go doesn't mean giving up on people or relationships. It means releasing the need to control outcomes and trusting that what's meant for you will never miss you. It means recognizing that some connections are meant to be temporary, teaching us lessons and helping us grow before they fade away. And that's okay. Every ending carries within it the seeds of a new beginning. So the next time you find yourself waiting for a text that doesn't come, remember this: you are not defined by someone else's actions or inactions. You are not diminished by their silence. You are whole, worthy, and complete exactly as you are. And the more you embody that truth, the more you'll attract people and experiences that reflect it back to you. In the end, it's not about whether they text you first or how often they reach out. It's about how you choose to show up for yourself, for your boundaries, and for the life you want to create. Their silence is simply that silence. What you fill it with is entirely up to you. And in that space, you hold all the power.